Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Vitality Wellbeing Programme series. My name is Jamie, and I'm part of the coaching team at Vitality, where my role is Head of Health Engagement. Now, the theme for August for us has been nutrition, and we've covered a real variety of topics. And today we've got a super interesting one. So I think that nutrition is a really emotive topic. It's something we all know the importance of, but maybe it comes to us at different points in our lives. So for today's session, we're really fortunate to be joined by Vitality Performance Champion, former professional rugby player, and performance nutritionist at Gloucester Rugby, James Hudson. Now, James is going to lead us through this one, and I think there's so many interesting points. There's obviously the kind of like mindset and approach to nutrition. And what we really want to make clear before we get into the actual details is how to work with young people to support their nutrition. So, James, thanks so much for joining us. Before we started recording, I was chewing your ear off as usual, but we were talking about kind of like the differences between the elite performers and the super elite. Now, that might not be relevant to everyone, and we want to make this session as inclusive as possible, but I think there's lessons that we can learn within that. So I'm really interested to get your thoughts on what those differences are, but specifically how that relates to nutrition as well.
Morning, Jamie. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, absolutely. We spoke, didn't we? Had a little chat around what does differentiate some of those athletes. And I think having been fortunate enough to play with some who were very, very highly rated super elite players, I wouldn't put myself in that category, but also being lucky enough to work with athletes who are developing into those players. I think really one of the key differences is the consistency of their approach, is how consistent they are with all of the little nuts and bolts which go together to build a performance and build an athlete, but also the fact that they've been doing it and building habits for such a long time. And where I think nutrition comes in is it's a skill for life. It's not just for athletes. It's not just for whether you're elite, super elite, or you purely just enjoy playing sport as part of life, which we hope we all do. It's definitely something which, if you build those habits from a young age, they become second nature, and you can enjoy a wide range of foods and that make it fit around your exercise, around life, and just build really good solid foundations in that.
Yeah, I think there's some key words there which are going to be themes throughout this conversation. Like one is enjoyment, and I think the other one is about like choices, and it's not strict measures or anything like that. And what we were interested in is about like you can take this to whatever extent that you want. Like this, we're maybe providing a framework for people to work within. If you're someone who is incredibly driven or has a young person in their lives who aspires to win Olympic Games or becomes the best in the world at what they do, then they probably do need to look after the smaller details. But there's almost like a dimmer switch, so you can tune it up so that you're doing absolutely everything, but also you kind of fit within other people as well. So, James, a question that I hear a lot is like, what's more important, like the training, the nutrition, or the kind of mindset? Now, I don't think we answer that question, but I kind of want to pass to you about why the food element is so important.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the fact in with young athletes, and when we talk about young athletes, we're talking about really active people who enjoy playing sport and being active, probably from that age range from sort of 10, 11 years old up to even sort of 20, 24 years old, because athletes are still growing right up to that point. I didn't finish growing until I was probably 21, 22. And so it does take a
That's
long
why
time
you're
to
so
reach
tall,
that
James.
end point. Well, exactly. That and the rack and stretching me. But, it was a long process, and that happens with young people at such different rates. Is we need to provide support for them throughout with their nutrition, because the training sessions or the sporting activities they take part in, they require a certain amount of energy. But what we forget often is that young people need a huge amount of energy simply to grow new bone, new muscle, new tissues across their body. They also need a huge amount of energy to actually support their health as well, and their well-being in general. But most importantly, we want to make sure that these habits they build and this understanding, they enjoy doing it. So we don't want to be restrictive. We don't want to have a narrow view of food choices. And that's what meals and snacks are. It's a series of choices each day. It's the same for us as adults. But as young people, what we want to try and make them realize is that each of those meals and snacks has the ability to fuel their training sessions or their sporting activities and their growth and daily needs, but also then to be able to sort of repair after these exercise sessions and grow those new bones, new muscles, but also then that they enjoy that process and they have a really happy relationship and understanding of how they can fuel those exercise sessions and their daily lives.
I think one thing that you said that might shock people is that the kind of age thing. So anywhere from up, you can talking 20s to 24 as well. So we continue to develop for a long time. And James, are you able to give an example from, I know we were speaking about kind of like the academy players and the younger athletes, maybe how much they're having to consume versus the first team professionals as well?
Yeah, if we pop onto the next slide, the way that actually we should view nutrition sometimes when we talk about energy is that we have obviously with energy intake, which is all the food and drinks that we consume. And sometimes we get very focused on just the amount of energy we need to do those exercise sessions. And we forget about actually the fact that our bodies need an availability of energy, this kind of pool of energy just to function and to actually, especially in younger athletes, to fuel all of these processes. And that's really the way that you want to think about it. And when we look at it, the research in younger athletes is growing, and there's been some fantastic work done over the last few years. And certainly in football, Marcus Hannon, who did some brilliant work at Everton Football Club with their academy, he demonstrated just how much energy they needed. And in fact, some of the age groups, under 16s up to under 18s, were actually needing more energy than the first team players. So that just to fuel their growth as well as all the activity they do. And we've got great examples as well in young rugby players. Debbie Smith up at Leeds did some brilliant work looking at young rugby league and rugby union players, and she demonstrated as well that as they go through those academy stages from under 14s, 15s, all the way up to under 20s, under 24s, the amount of energy they need really is only increases as they do more training. So actually, when they're slightly smaller, the amount of energy they need for their body size is pretty comparable across all of those age groups. So the amount of energy that is proportionally needed for all of those activities of growth and repair is huge in those younger age groups, which counts for a large proportion of what they need each day.
Right. Okay. So I really like the scientific approach that you have, James, because all of this is founded in research. And I think when you're talking there about kind of like energy intake, and so just to be clear, when you up to a certain age, the energy demands that you require level the amount of activity that you're doing. But then as you get into the kind of like teen development years, the amount that you require to intake is above and beyond just the activity level, because there's also a demand to cope with your body's changes and the physiological hormonal changes that are going on as well. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, essentially, we want to think about having this availability of energy. So we want to make sure that there's enough intake, enough food and drink to meet not only the needs of the exercise, but also then have a large amount of energy available for all of those other processes as well. So we don't want to get too focused on just trying to fuel training or exercise with younger people. We want to make sure that over the whole day, we're considering all of the things which they're doing as well as their growth, to make sure that there's a huge amount of energy available to them. So I think that's the sort of key point is, let's not just focus on how much activity they're doing. Let's not underestimate how much energy is required to grow. All the cognitive brain function of being at school or college and learning and doing exams and all of those elements as well. But then you've also got to factor in trying to grow fresh tissue and bone, muscle, everything else like that. So I think the point to make really is we can't really underestimate how much energy these young people need, especially when they're without all that activity they're doing to start with. Okay? So that's the main take home point, is I think it's very easy to underestimate how much energy these young people need.
I don't think this was anything I remember from being younger, but I'm not sure my mum's packed lunches changed from when I was 15 to, like, I didn't have packed lunches at 15, but there was no real difference between them. And when you're working with academy players, because I'm sure whether you're a parent or someone who supports a young person, you want to do the best for them. But I never really would have considered that. When you're working with players and they come in, maybe more at the start, how much are parents conscious of that, or is it something that you literally have to go through with every single person because it's not known enough?
So I think what we try to do is we ultimately, parents, use that fancy word, stakeholders, is parents are the main stakeholders in these young people, because they're the ones who tend to go and do the shopping. They're the ones who tend to do the cooking as well when they're younger. So actually, we've done a lot of work previously with the parents. So we'll do cooking sessions or education sessions with the parents as well as the young athletes as well, because it's all very well us trying to educate the younger athletes, but things will often get lost in translation. Things get left in the school bag. Things don't make their way back home. So actually speaking and working with the parents as well to help them understand exactly how to to manage that energy need and opportunities, which is what we'll really talk about now, is those little tips and tricks just to make sure that we're actually making the best of every opportunity during a day, but also working with hugely different budgets, hugely different timescales and constraints around parents, working hours, all these factors. Is trying to find a route and a strategy to make sure that we're meeting all those energy needs.
Perfect. I think you've set the context really, really well. And I guess now we'll go into the more practical advice.
Yeah. Well, so we know from some brilliant research which has been done in young footballers is that there are gaps. So I think the best thing to do is we can identify those gaps and we can use that information to inform how we then try and encourage younger athletes to eat, and again, the parents to support that. So one of the big things that we find with young athletes is that they tend to get a really good portion of these protein-rich foods. So when protein-rich foods, we're talking about meat, fish, dairy products such as cheese, milk, yogurt, eggs, obviously, and beans, pulses, nuts, seeds, or other options as well, depending on whether you have vegan, vegetarian athletes as well. But what they tend to do is when they come home in the evening at home is to have a really, really big portion of protein. It's something that we all do have a tendency to do, but especially in younger athletes, they tend to neglect that at breakfast and in their snacks during the day. So especially when they get to the ages sort of 15, 16 to 18, that tends to be something that we see in this group. So again, the reasons behind the need for protein being really quite high in these athletes is because they're building muscle, they're building fresh bone, and all of these things need those building blocks, amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein to try and support that growth. So I think the things that we talk about with young athletes is trying to include a better source of protein at breakfast. Yes, we want to get plenty of fuel for the day, so lots of carbohydrate rich foods in, but if we can also include some really good protein sources, so that might be having some higher protein yogurt, Greek or skyr yogurt with their breakfast, with overnight oats, or or with porridge. It could be having a couple of poached eggs or scrambled eggs with some toast or bagels as well to increase that protein content. And just trying to increase that at breakfast and make sure that they start the day with a really good supporting those building blocks for all that repair and growth that they're going to undergo. Because we want to try and make sure that throughout the day we get regular portions of protein throughout the day. Something which you've probably heard me talk before. I always talk about this in adults because it's something we tend not to do very well. But again, if we can build these habits into youngsters and include those foods at breakfast, we're going to meet those needs a little bit more effectively as well.
Quick question on that, James, because we've had quite a few pre-registered questions, and one of them was about timing of nutrition. So are you saying that it's important to get protein throughout the day because the timing is important and how that helps your body? Or is it more because having it more frequently will mean that at the end of the day, you would have hit the target amount? Like it's going to be much more difficult to eat the whole amount in one go. So is it a timing element or is it actually a quantity element?
Great question. And it's both.
Cool, great answer.
So from a science point of view, we want to try and get multiple portions through the day because we want to, there's no one time in the day where we need protein and we can't store it in the body. We can't say, oh great, you've had 4 times as much as you need at this meal, we'll just pop this in the back pocket for later on and we'll just use it. We don't have that ability. So what we want to try and do is regular points throughout the day. So that's the timing element of it. And like you say, if we look after that timing, the cumulative total over the day is more likely to meet those higher needs of a young athlete. So it works in both ways. So by building habits which are regular portions, it's the same as in adult athletes as well, is that then we'll make sure the total is also where it needs to be. And when there are those gaps or those lower opportunities at meals, like in the snacks, snacks, we can do things like portable, wraps, things like that, leftover chicken, tinned fish or pouches of fish, things like that in wraps. You can, we'll talk about, we can sneak a few veggies in there as well. They're really good portable options. Things like your yogurt pouches, great options. We can make lots of little homemade bars, balls, things like that, which have got oat bases with fruit as well. But you can also include some protein sources in there as well to accompany those. So it's little things like that. If we can just look after the breakfast and snacks, as well as the likelihood of meeting their needs at lunch and at dinner, all of a sudden, that, like you say, that total over the day is more likely to be met.
Amazing, super clear, but never underestimate the importance of protein.
Yeah. And then the second really big gap that we see in those big food groups tends to be that as the athletes get a little bit older, they tend to start to reduce the amount of carbohydrate and fat that they eat. So whether that is just them being maybe a bit more conscious of what they're eating, maybe they're becoming a little bit more thoughtful around other aspects of their nutrition, but relative to their body mass, we do see a bit of a reduction as they go from sort of 14, 15 years old up to 17 and 18. So it's really important to keep that supply of energy going, because even though they might have peaked in terms of some of their growth earlier than others, you're still going to be effectively then doing more and more exercise as you get older. The likelihood is, if you're playing at any kind of club or team, training sessions start to increase during the week, start to slot in sessions after school, or even in the morning. If you're a swimmer, those early mornings start to clock up quite quickly if you're swimming at a good level. So again, the activity starts to go up, plus, as we said, all the other activities that you're doing during the day. So your total energy is going to be mostly found from these energy foods, from carbohydrate rich foods and some fat. So again, it tends to be at breakfast again where we see adolescent athletes start to almost reduce their relative portion sizes at breakfast and at snacks. So again, breakfast, it's by making it quick, because as we know, rushing out the door to get to school or college becomes a big factor. Making sure you're on time for that. If you've got getting public transport, if you're meeting friends, all these little things start to slot in. So being prepared is the real key. So again, making things like your overnight oats or your soaked oats breakfasts, rather than having to do porridge fresh in the morning, you can do a big bulk box of Bircher muesli or overnight oats, and then have that, a portion of that in the morning at breakfast. Snacks, again, being able to have really fuel-based snacks with you, so that if you're training after school or college, in that transition between school and off to training or to go and do some exercise, you're going to be able to have an opportunity. So again, making things based around cereals, making things based around oats, dates, dried fruit, selections like that, really energy dense foods. We can slot those in, wraps which contain things like sliced banana, nut butters, really full of energy. Wow. And full of fuel.
That sounds good.
But you can do lots of little things. But again, it's just trying to slot them in to top up those energy levels so you can fuel that training or exercise that you're going to go and do. So again, your total over the day is going to meet your needs, rather than finishing the day in a little bit of a debt.
I think, James, people might be a bit shocked at how much young people are required to eat, and I'm sure you're over that shock now. But what you've just said there is obviously you're wanting to make sure that the person that you're supporting is consuming enough. And sometimes if you're doing a lot of training, you actually don't want to eat, and you're kind of having to force yourself to eat. So how do you work? Like you mentioned, I think a brilliant example there with a wrap, peanut butter, banana, that is a calorie dense meal, that is going to provide you with a lot of energy. Is there any advice on how you can support parents to make sure their kids are getting enough without shoveling food in their mouth the whole time? Because that's also probably not the healthiest relationship.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it is picking those dense choices. So it's, when it comes to carbohydrate foods, it is picking, your oats or mueslis at breakfast that are quite dense. It's picking things like rice, again, rice and pastas which eat well hot and cold, that you can include in dishes and leftovers. So it's finding those opportunities within the day. If you're in transition between school, going into golf and go and do a sport in the evening, or if it's getting home in the evenings after that. But it's also then using liquid meals is quite a good thing as well. So smoothies are a brilliant option, because again, you can hide quite a lot of fruit in there and veg. You can add quite a lot of energy in there. Things like bananas in smoothies with some milk, some yogurt. And you can add a little bit of honey in there as well. You can even add in some nut butters again, which are quite energy dense. So finding easy ways that are, like you say, satisfy. You don't feel like you're trying to stuff yourself, but just finding gaps where you can find suitable things. So smoothies are a really good thing to include, again, because like you say, you're not feeling like you're eating all the time, but you are getting more and more energy and fuel into you. Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. That sounds great. Cool.
I think then we sort of get onto these specific nutrients, which is kind of not too sciencey, but a bit more nitty gritty. Is that we do find, obviously, that in this group, we do find that calcium is a really important one, because obviously their bones are growing at quite a quick rate. We often see, especially after this period of the year, summer holidays, some of the academy players might turn back up in the younger age groups and have grown 2 or 3 inches over the summer, because they've simply had a break from maybe doing quite as much sport. So that amount of energy that they require to do all of that extra exercise is reduced, and all of a sudden they probably have got more energy available to their bodies, and they've grown quite a lot during the summer. So we can't underestimate how important that inclusion of calcium-rich foods are. And we often see that in young athletes, especially with female athletes as well, we do see them maybe neglect some of those sources. So really, really good things to include primarily is dairy foods. Dairy foods are the king when it comes to getting calcium in. It's really well absorbed, and again, it's very flexible food, so we can include them in different ways. But generally, a cup of whole milk will have a good portion of calcium in there. And if you add into that 2 or 3 tablespoons of higher protein yogurt like skyr or Greek yogurt, all of a sudden you've got almost sort of nearly half of your daily calcium requirements in that sort of smoothie or in those foods. Again, those portable yogurts are really good ideas. Not so popular with adolescent athletes is green vegetables a lot of the time, but they also are a really valuable source of calcium. So things like broccoli, kale, green, all those kind of green veg are really important. And actually, one of the surprising ones that people underestimate as well is tinned fish. Tinned fish is superb for calcium. It's almost half the daily requirements in a tin of, and now you can get so many flavors. One of the top snacks that I'll push some of our younger players towards will be, a tin of sardines in for the barbecue sauce or tomato sauce on toast. I know your face there.
Is it good?
It tastes really good. The flavors are much better now. It's got heaps and heaps of calcium, and because all of the tiny little bones, which you don't even notice when you eat them, you get loads of calcium from that. But it's also packed with really good fat sources and some protein as well. So as a quick snack, it's an absolute powerhouse of a snack. So tinned fish, tinned mackerel, tinned sardines, packed full of calcium, but also got some really other important nutrients. So if you can get them eating these sort of things more regularly, and again, you might, Jamie, if you're having it, you might need a little bit more barbecue sauce.
I'm trying it. I'm going to try it.
But trust me, it is an absolute powerhouse of a snack for a young athlete. You tick a lot of boxes with some of those choices.
James, I think this slide is fascinating. I've got 3 questions for you.
Yes.
One of which we had was a pre-registered question. I'll ask one at a time. Lots of people asking about, is dairy okay? So there's so many milk alternatives, for example. I know some adults might feel like they have intolerance and things. If your child doesn't have an intolerance, what's your thoughts on clearly dairy milk you promote?
Absolutely. I think it's a real issue at the moment in general is that dairy products get vilified a little bit, and really it's not founded as well. I think in this country, definitely the way in which animals are reared and cared for, but also how milk is produced in this country has had a lot of issues economically as well. But from a nutrition standpoint, it is a fantastic source of protein, a fantastic source of electrolytes for rehydration. So after sport, milk is a fantastic recovery drink for after sport, because it replenishes a lot of the sodium that we lose in sweat. So it helps us rehydrate as well as getting a good source of carbohydrate and protein in. So, chocolate milk is a fantastic recovery drink straight out of the bottle. Dairy foods are really, really useful. Having said that, I completely understand if you've got young athletes or young people who do have intolerances, because it's not uncommon. So the really important thing to look for then is, if you're going to use milk alternatives, is to make sure they are fortified. So that means that they've had some of that added, so they're fortified with calcium, so you're getting a comparable amount of calcium into those dairy alternatives. Because, like we said before, by not meeting our needs in terms of calcium and energy, we're more likely to develop poor structural bones, and our bone health as we progress in age, especially if you're then playing contact sports, things like that, it's not favorable. So across the board, exercise will stimulate bone turnover and bone development, but you need the building blocks. We need to provide the body with what it needs to strengthen and make sure those bones are dense, and they're built for life as well. So when we're in our later years, we've got strong bones which we've created in our younger years. So you can't underestimate how important including these foods are. That's
fascinating. Next question. You've blown my mind that green veg has a good amount of calcium in. I had no idea about that. Well, it has some anyway. How would you, again, you kind of raised the point about maybe less appetizing potentially. Have you got any recipes or ideas of how you can not hide necessarily green veg, but make sure that you're getting it into the snacks and meals?
Yeah, absolutely. You do, and you do have to become a bit stealthy with some of these things with kids. I've got 2 young boys who aren't 6 and 8, so we already get the look at some of those. But I think so. Things like spinach is a really easy one because if you've got wraps, things like that, that's got plenty of flavour, and whatever you build your sort of sandwich or wrap fillings, you can always hide a little bit of spinach or some leaves in there. When it comes to things like smoothies, obviously you can get lots of these smoothie packs now, which have got a really nice combination of sweeter fruits like your mangoes and your pineapples, but they might also have a bit of kale or green veg in there as well. So, give it a good name. We always call them Hulk smoothies when I'm trying to get it into rugby players because
Nice.
it'll appeal to their nature. But yeah, by slipping a few things like that in, and you can also include them into the homemade sauces. If you have a curry, putting spinach or leaves into a curry and really fine doesn't detract from the texture as well. So using things like frozen spinach where it's been chopped finely, you don't notice that in sauces, and you're more likely to get the result of it actually being eaten. So yeah, lots of little ways of stealthily sneaking it into things.
Nice. Stealthily is a great word.
Yeah.
I actually do that with the frozen spinach as well. And I think the last point actually isn't a question, just again, conscious of obviously like rising costs of living and things like that. So frozen spinach goes a really long way. And I think it's really reasonable. And similarly, I guess tinned fish is a relatively cheap protein source compared to, I don't know, like fresh meats or cooked meats and things like that. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. They're really good options, but and we shouldn't underestimate frozen foods are not nutritionally poorer than fresh in pretty much all cases. So fruit and veg will be frozen almost immediately after harvest. So the quality and the nutrition in them is not going to be vastly different to whether it's fresh or not. There's a few things that are tinned, veg and things like that, but we wouldn't tend to have those from tinned sources anyway. But tinned fish, again, really good quality in terms of protein, omega-3 fats, and like we talked about, so the calcium in smaller fish and tinned fish. Again, like you say, really cost effective, great portable snacks as well. They're non-perishable. So you can, the pouches, the tins are really good ways of having those with you, almost like a little survival pack when you're away from home or on training camps, things like that.
And whoever you're with whilst eating them will love you, won't they? Have a great time.
Even more, your roommate or your friends will be even more thankful. But you'll have strong bones and you'll be big and strong. So
that's all I want. I'm in.
Yeah, and then to complement that as well, the other really key nutrient that we see very, very prevalent deficiencies in is iron. So obviously young female athletes have to be really conscious of this as they develop into having a menstrual cycle, but also young male athletes, we do see low iron levels in at times. So it's picking the right sources, but it's also quite cool because you can pick combinations of things in this. Iron's obviously really important because the heme iron, which is in our red blood cells, helps to carry oxygen so obviously when we're exercising, we want that to be really efficient process. So when we're talking about iron, we're mostly talking about two forms, which is heme or non-heme iron. So heme iron is from an animal source, from beef, lamb, red meat tends to be your main source. You can get a little bit in some fish, but generally it's those red meat choices. And non-heme iron would be from a plant-based or a vegetable source. Again, there are some really good options there. But when we do have it in meals, it's also really valuable to combine it with foods that are rich in vitamin C, because that will also help us absorb all that iron as well. So as examples, if we're looking at meat options, stir fries with beef is a really, really good option. Again, you don't have to use massively expensive cuts of beef. You can use slower cooked, cheaper cuts, and then just shred it up and have that in stir fries with things like orange and peppers, which are really rich in vitamin C, and that combination will help you actually absorb that. So yeah, beef stir fries with those kind of peppers, peppers, spring onions, but then with high vitamin C fruits like oranges as well can be a really tasty way of doing that. Things like Middle Eastern foods, which have got things like lamb. So again, you can use cheaper, slow cooked cuts of lamb or beef in there as well, but you can combine that with apricots. Dried apricots are a really good source of iron as well, and vitamin C. So we can do things like that. So again, combining it in a dish complements the nutritional value of it and will help us absorb all those nutrients and make sure that iron levels are as high as possible. But yeah, the non-heme versions are mostly from things like dried fruit. So dried apricots in trail mixes are a really good option. Dates, figs, things like that also have a small amount. So combining those and making sure that we're getting enough of that. If we are really struggling, if again we're dealing with athletes maybe who are vegetarian or vegan, using fortified cereals and fruit juices is the best route to that. So they're obviously a little bit more processed, but there's no concerns over that, because what you're trying to do is achieve the same nutrient value, if that makes sense. So in a smoothie, you could pop in some fortified orange juice, which has got vitamin C, but it's also got some iron, which is fortified with. Some breakfast cereals as well are quite heavily fortified with iron as well. So you could add those in, after an exercise session with some milk or non-dairy milk as a recovery snack. That's quite a good little combination as well, because you'll get some iron from those sources. But it's worth being really considering where you're getting your iron from and making sure that you're including it pretty regularly throughout the week.
Amazing. There's again, you keep on touching on the questions that are being asked most frequently. Another one was about red meat, because I think that there's a myth with growing big and strong, you need to eat steak and eggs and pints of milk and stuff like that. So the question that we actually got was like, is red meat okay? And to tie that in with what you're saying here, how much, say, red meat would you look for in a week to not only give you the nutritional value, but also the iron that you're talking about as well?
That's a great question. So to start off with red meat, so the issues around red meat are more when you're talking about really highly processed choices. So if you're talking about highly processed things like, highly, not homemade, but highly processed foods like burgers, sausages, other meat products which have got red meat in them, but they've also got other aspects such as nitrates and things like that in quite high quantities. That's where there's more correlation with potentially longer term health issues as we get older. If we're eating smaller portions, sufficient portions of whole cuts of red meat or good quality minced beef or lamb, things like that, there is no issue at all with having 3 to 4 portions a week of that. So a portion for a young athlete, so 20 grams of protein from that source would be about 100 grams of beef or lamb.
Okay.
Maybe
cool.
Slightly more in some cuts. So it's not a huge amount. I think, we talk about those sort of palm-sized portions of protein.
Yeah.
That is sufficient, because you're going to get some protein in other sources in your meals, from other pulses, from grains, other things like that. But from the meat and fish portions, that sort of palm-sized portion, which in beef or lamb, for example, are those 2 red meat options we talked about, would be roughly somewhere between 100 to 130 grams raw.
Yeah.
3 or 4 portions of that during a week, maybe just 2 to 3 for smaller athletes as well. Yeah. That's going to be absolutely sufficient. We're not talking about eating, like you say, half a cow and thinking that's what's going to make it. Again, it's the timing across the day. It's getting some portions in across the day and making sure that they're sufficient, but they're not excessive. Is the message that we want to put in.
Amazing. I think, James, what I'm going from this, there's so many good tips here, is that the important factor with adapting nutrition to younger people is around how much they require, and maybe certain vitamins and minerals. But standard advice like this is surely for all age groups. And I think what's great though about us doing this specifically targeting at those that support young people is that you're getting these habits and these behaviors in from day one. So I just checking that everything that you've said there is relevant to adults as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We wouldn't be promoting eating lots and lots of highly processed red meat in any age group. And so I think that it's just understanding that your portions, understanding which sources you're getting it from, but also that these foods complement each other, in that we're not just getting protein from meat, fish products. We can make sure it's in a sustainable and ethical way, and that it actually, which is out of my lane, but just making sure that we understand what the portion is. The biggest mistake that people make is we massively overconsume protein at certain times during the day, and we underconsume it at other times of the day. So by having a nice diverse range of foods that we get it from, appreciating that we can get valuable sources from, some grains from pulses, lentils, other sources as well, to combine to bring together a total across the day, means that we will be benefiting health. But then by making sure we're getting the right portions of these foods, especially in these younger athletes who are tending to be deficient in it at certain times, we're making sure they've got enough iron, so they're not feeling fatigued. They're replacing lost iron, especially in young female athletes. It's a really important habit to get into from a young age.
Perfect. I really like palm-sized portion per meal as a minimum kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a really, really simple, handheld. You've got it with you all the time. It's a nice reminder, and it's something that we use with with experienced athletes alike as well as younger athletes.
Yeah.
So it applies to all of us. And as we've mentioned, the stealth mission of fruit and vegetables, I like to think of us as parents sometimes as being nutrient ninjas, is that we've got to find creative ways. And we've mentioned some of these already, but we want to try and promote that mentality that the plates and the snacks and everything are colorful. We've got plenty of range of colors. We've got plenty of variety, and that we just try and find ways of including them in different ways. Like I mentioned, stir fries, you can do stir fries with peppers and oranges in. You can do, homemade sweet and sour chicken with pineapple in and peppers in, things like that. Homemade tomato sauces. Anyone who's heard me speak before, I always talk about, if you make sauces in bulk, it goes a long way, and it's a very cost-effective way of doing it. But by including lots of roasted veg, you can go and get heaps of roasted veg, courgettes, aubergines, tomatoes, peppers, roasted with chopped tomatoes or passata in a blender, and make a tomato sauce from scratch, which you can use in a whole range of dishes. You can use it as a base for a curry, bolognese, chili, everything like that. Again, you could hide veg in there, hide fiber and all the good stuff in there, and get it past not only the younger people in the household, but also some of the older people who don't want to do that.
I think what, James, I really like about your approach is that it's all backed in science, and it's all backed from your career as well, and the kind of things that you had to do. But you're clearly a massive food fan as well. Like, you like food, and I think that's such an important message. Like, that looks really cool and really nice. If you give someone some bland broccoli, no one's going to like it. So, like, it's about getting this message across to people that you really can enjoy your food and make it fit nutritionally with the goals that you need it to.
Completely. And and great portable snacks as well for after school. I've been doing packed lunches for the last 2 weeks for my two when they go off to sports camp during the day, during the holidays. Even just trying to sneak in a few veg sticks with some funky dips. It doesn't have to be your kind of go-to hummus recipe. It could be, stuff with maybe butter beans, cannellini beans, lots of different flavors in there, putting beetroot in there to make it bright pink, or just making stuff colorful and interesting. And that's what we're trying to spark in youngsters. We're trying to spark interest in food. We're trying to spark a bit of passion and enjoyment so that they come back to the and also they develop skills in the kitchen and the ability to shop and all of these complementary skills, which will ultimately end up with behaviors that support them in whatever their endeavors are.
I think on that point, how do you do that? So if you're a young person that likes food, then I imagine it's relatively straightforward to help them to support that and go on that journey. Like, for you, for example, were you a keen chef, or what comes first with this? How do you get kids to start having an interest and enjoying a taste? Because I know that if I cook something nice, it means, okay, I want more of that. And then you're on that journey. But for a long time, I was just eating food for function, and I didn't really know any different.
Yeah, I think it comes from trying foods. It's not, again, I've got to be careful to stay in my lane and I'm not a psychologist or anybody who's got knowledge around those behaviors of food. But for me, was growing up, it was just trying lots of different foods. It was having different meals, and it was being encouraged to try it. And some things I wouldn't like, some things I would, but it was just trying things regularly. And then if you didn't like something, it was kind of coming back to it a few weeks later and trying it again, because your taste palette changes, the way in which something is cooked changes, how it tastes and how the texture in your mouth. And I think it's just trying a wide variety of fruit and veg and foods in general, because once you find out what you like from a very early stage, it's very easy to just keep going with, I like that, I just have it on repeat, and we become bored, and it's not sustainable at any point in life. So if we can try and have a broad range of foods, a broad range of things to try, some will be successes. Your kitchen disasters are absolutely fine, where people aren't that happy with it. But trying lots of different foods is definitely the way. And then I think it's encouraging kids to get involved in the kitchen. It's giving them simple jobs to do, to join in making dinner. Obviously, we don't want to be handing them a huge, great big chef's knife at 10, but they can start to get involved in stirring a pan or even doing baking. Baking's a really good one because it's relatively scientific. It's measure this, measure that, numbers on a scale, mix it together and put it in the oven. It's quite a good way of doing it. And then making snacks and things like that. I think it's encouraging them to understand how things arrive on the table, because it does sometimes get to that point where they sit down and something just arrives. Whereas if they know where it's come from, what it's made of, they can start to have have feelings about how it's being made, and understand that a little bit as well. So
yeah, I think that's a really important message, is that the role isn't just putting the food on the table, like you say. It's getting people bought into the ideas and the taste. And look, I'll try tinned fish. Okay, I'll do it.
that's your mission for the week. That's it for the week.
I promise I shall do it.
But I think that brings us on as well to the fact that it is food we're talking about, and I think the pressures of social media are that we're all bombarded with it, and obviously children are adolescent athletes are going to be at some point, whether it's just conversations in the playground, somebody who has access to social media, and you'll start to get bombarded. And then unfortunately, the sad reality is that a lot of supplement companies and food generally is aimed at looking a certain way or feeling a certain way. And I think we have to be really, really conscious of that there are supplements that are promoted towards younger athletes or just younger teenagers. So I think it's just making sure that we understand that we are primarily talking about food. There is no need to supplement with protein powders, diet teas, all this faff and nonsense that is spouted across the nutrition landscape, especially when unfortunately unethically it's targeted at younger individuals as well. So we don't need protein powders or supplements at younger ages. It's something that, working with athletes who are in team sports, within a premiership club, we don't use supplements with them until they're maybe even 19, 20, if and when we know they've got a really good nutrition foundation put in place and they're in good habits, they understand what they need from a nutrition point of view, and then we could look at a few things that would be towards that sort of towards the professional athlete end. There is no real need at this young stage. So I think it's encouraging those conversations, to all the parents out there. I think it's encouraging conversations with your young active athletes around that, so that they understand those things. But it just isn't a need, and it can end up having some really unfortunate and dangerous consequences. So I think encourage the conversations with your young people or young athletes, and just understand that there's not a need for those products, and actually just embracing food and understanding what you need and getting into those habits is what's going to make you succeed in whatever your endeavors are. So yeah, I just wanted to include that
before. Yeah. I think you're really strong in that. I think you've often said food first is always the approach, and it's interesting to see that at Gloucester you kind of maybe see it as your responsibility, because am I right in saying that sometimes a supplement could be an easier, quicker alternative? Like, I think it maybe comes down to planning and things like that. Like, if you've got the right foods, then obviously that's how you make sure that you can get it food first. But if you're being sold powders and pills and things like that, on paper looks easier, but like you said, you've got responsibility as a guide to these young people to say, actually, this is what you need, and then, hey, maybe there's a time for it, but it's definitely not any time before they get to fully adult life. And again, like what level of sport they're playing as well.
Completely. And I mean, even at first team level, working with professional athletes, the reasons why we might use some supplementary protein powder and things like that would be in situations where we maybe have multiple sessions back to back, and you've got very short periods of time, so you need something which is very easily digestible and meets your nutrition requirements. But again, we'll include that with fruit and veg and with milk or non-dairy milk alternatives to make it into more of a smoothie. And if we click onto the next slide, where we just have a little look at that sort of smoothie builder, is you don't need to have a scoop of protein powder will have sort of about 20-24 grams of protein in. So that with water is often pretty unappetizing in its own right. But if we just think, if you've got a cup of milk and 3 tablespoons of Greek or skyr yogurt, that's going to be 30 grams of protein. So there's no need to have a scoop of expensive powder in, which is essentially just filtered milk anyway. So we add in some fruit and veg as those kind of protection foods to protect us and build our health. We add in some fuel, banana, oats, muesli, nuts and seeds, nut butters, avocado. Frozen avocado goes really well in a smoothie and makes it really creamy tasting. We can pack these things full of nutrition, and we don't need to be looking anywhere else at this point. You're not doing multiple sessions back to back to back, so we're not necessarily need that. After you've played sport, like I said, things like chocolate milk, milkshakes, things like that are really good ways of replenishing a lot of the things we lose in exercise. So I think it's just, we don't want to encourage that to look elsewhere first. Let's start with food first. yes, at the higher levels and older stages, it's not food only. There are things that we might need to supplement for performance basis. But at this point, as an adolescent young athlete, let's just encourage the use and the power of these food choices that we make each day to meet our needs.
James, I think one of the great things around smoothies as well is we've been conscious of cost. So obviously there is an initial investment in like a blender kind of thing, but a smoothie these days could cost you anywhere from sort of £3 up to £6-7. So having that initial investment, the payback time will be pretty quick, considering that you can then start to make your own using frozen veg and things like that, and fruits and stuff. So surely for you, it must be a quick win in terms of it won't take long to pay back that initial cost.
No, absolutely. You're exactly right. You get that little bit of outlay to start with, but it facilitates, again, another habit to build into, and a really easy way of packing nutrition into something which you can drink in a couple of minutes. It's a great thing to have when you're going between school or college and into going to do some sport, or if it's something that you can have when you get through the door after doing some exercise or some training in the evening. It's something you can have that's nice and quick and easy before you have, maybe a main meal later on. It's just another way of making those multiple opportunities during the day fit together in a way that's sustainable, that you can do all the time. So really easy way of packing nutrition in, lots and lots of positive things. And a lot of the nutrients we've talked about come back in, and they're very easy to include in these kind of in smoothie packs. So yeah, really good tool to have in your toolbox and opportunities.
I'm a big fan of smoothies, I have to say. James, we've covered so much today, but I think there's been some really good tips and little pieces of advice. So I think you're going to just put this together for us in what a day might look like, considering everything you've said.
Yeah, I think, like we say, we talk about food. That is how we view nutrition. So trying to think about those opportunities during the day. This is just an example. It will all be different for everybody who's listening. So again, that opportunity at breakfast that we talked about, the common gap with young athletes is getting a good source of protein in at breakfast. So if that's a couple of poached eggs on your bagel, if you're really someone who struggles to get enough energy in, having a bit of mashed avocado on your bagel with your eggs, having a bit of nut butter on your other half of your bagel, or having some overnight oats, again, like we talked about. As we get towards 15, 16 to 18-year-olds, they have a tendency not to eat enough carbohydrate at breakfast. So again, easy options which we can prepare in bulk at the start of the week. Things like overnight oats or bircher muesli are brilliant options to have in the fridge, ready to go, and you'll find that it doubles up as a little snack as well during the day if they're picking around and trying to find food, as they often are. So again, starting the day in that way sets us up and gets us going. And then it's options. If you're not fortunate enough to have food options, canteens at school or college, it could be that it's packed lunch, quick options. So again, wraps and options like that with tinned fish are a great idea. Tuna wrap with some spinach in there as well, and some veg, some fruit. They're really quick, easy ways of having a portable lunch to have, say, around that middle of the day time. If you're then transitioning into finishing school or college and heading off to go and do some sport, whether it's a training session with a team you play for, or whether it's some structured individual sport training, get something in. Don't go to that training session under fuel, because the quality of what you get done will be poor and you won't feel the best when you're doing it. So try and get something in. That's where smoothies come in. We've just talked a little bit about that, but portable smoothies, nutrition packed, maybe some fruit, things like trail mixes, again, are a great thing. Loads of energy, nuts and seeds, dried fruit. Include some apricots, dates, figs in there to get your iron in as well. And we're flying. We're going into a session to go and do some training, and we're feeling fueled. We've taken the first 3 opportunities of the day, and we're absolutely flying into doing some training. And then it's all about refueling. It's all about trying to recover all those energy stores in our body. So we want to get lots of carbohydrate foods in, especially if it's been a long session that's been really, really hard work. Let's make sure we're getting in those dense options that we talked about. Sweet potatoes, pasta, rices. Those form the backbone and the foundation of the plate. And then we've got some colourful veg and fruit in there, either whether it's hidden or on plain sight. And then we've got our protein portions in there as well to make sure we've got a complete balanced plate with everything that we need. And then towards the end of the day, we all get a little bit peckish, especially if we've done loads of exercise during the day and in the evening. The opportunity then is to then get another little portion. It could even be having some yogurt with fruit. It could be a smoothie. It could be that you almost do a little bit of a repeated breakfast. I've seen have a lot of athletes who like those type of foods in the evening, so it could be a bit more of those overnight oats with some skyr or Greek yogurt. It It could be, could be a multigrain bagel with some nut butter. It's just another good chance to get some more energy, some more fuel, and some more protein into us before we sleep. All right, so trying to meet our total over the day with lots of really high quality, nutritious foods. But again, we can pick options that fit a budget and fit a schedule to work things around. The worst thing we can do really is just stick to those 3 meal opportunities in a day and think that we're going to be able to go and fuel training and perform at our best. So let's try and take all the opportunities we can during the day. It might feel like we're all eating constantly, but in a way, that's how we need it to feel, to make sure that we're able to go and train with some energy and feel really that we're producing good quality in whatever we're doing. So whatever your endeavours are, that we're enjoying our sport and we're enjoying our food.
I think, James, that day's food sounds great. Like there's variety in there, there's enjoyment in there. And what I've learned more than anything, I think that the advice that you've given, there's some really strong pillars to focus on for everyone. But actually, the role of a parent or a guardian or someone supporting a young person is to help them enjoy what they're doing, enjoy the way that they think about food, like their relationships, the habits that they build. And you can do that by creating variety. And that day is a great example. Like, I'm sure everyone would agree that that looks like a really great day's worth of eating. So I think that's a really key take-home message for me, for sure.
Definitely. It's, like you said, it's all about encouraging a wide variety of foods, understanding what role they play in whatever training or exercise we're doing, but then just never underestimate how much young athletes need to support all the growing that they're doing. All the brain function of sitting in school and college every day, it requires a lot of energy. So meeting those energy needs are just going to create happy, healthy athletes, and that's what we want. Good habits that we can take into later life as well.
I love that. I think that's a great place for us to wrap up. James, it's always so good to work with you. Thanks for sharing and draining all of your knowledge. I always ask so many questions, but it's super important. So we appreciate your time.
Pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.
Always. And for everyone watching, I hope that you've enjoyed this session. I hope that we've covered your questions. And please do continue to support our wellbeing program. This content is open to everyone. So we think health is health. So it doesn't matter if you're a Vitality member or not. Share this with friends, family. If you want to check out our YouTube catalogue there's the full range of content that we have. Subscribe to that, and we hope to see you at another event soon. And in the meantime, James, I'm going to go get myself some tinned fish.
Good. I want the feedback.